That does mean that I need 7 volunteers, because it'll just be so boring listening to me reading 7 chapters. So, Sarah, can you just hand these out to different people, please? Thank you. Ruth and Ruth, yeah, they gotta be on it. It's been a while, hasn't it, since we've had Joshua and Caleb recently crop up, but now we've got Ruth. Okay, who's got number 1? You got number 1. Okay, we'll just wait a moment until people. So if you've got a Bible, either a paper copy or on your phone, turn to Ruth, the Old Testament, and chapter 1, verse 1, and we're just going to read through all of it. You'll also see that the words come up on the screen, so you can follow it on the screen. People who've got the roaming mic, you'll just need to pass it. On the top of the sheet, you've got a number. So number 1 needs to pass it on to number 2, and so forth. There's 7 sheets, okay? This is just such a beautiful story. The story of Ruth is just a beautiful story. Someone should make it into a film. It's just would make a great film. So let's just make ourselves feel comfortable and just listen to this wonderful story.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they had lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and one said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me."
And at this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." So when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. The 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favour." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. He was from the clan of Elimelech.
Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people who you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favour in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants."
At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley that she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Where's the next person? Thank you.
Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor."
He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured it into 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with its property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it."
Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon. I have acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Though the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David.
Read. Beautifully read. Great. I wonder if we could put up a slide, please, Rachel, of the different cross-cultural ministries that are helping us. So we'll come back to Ruth in a moment, but it's just to say, as we as a church, I didn't mention this earlier, as we as a church seek to welcome others, particularly those from other cultures, there are ministries and groups that help to do this. One of them is iNet, who you may or may not be familiar with. You might be familiar with iNet because of Summer 21 or Summer 22. But iNet is a model of mission sending and sustaining that is basically churches working together to do it. So a group of churches, most of them in southeast London, came together because they had a number of missionaries overseas to support them. And it's developed from there to have different churches here in London, not only thinking about sending people overseas, but also thinking how we welcome people in a London context and how we equip our church members to do cross-cultural work really well. So there's a few things that iNet do. You could do a Google for iNet and you'd find out more from their website. iNet church mission support, supporting local churches in global mission. We've then, I don't know if you can see this very well, we've got an organisation called Welcome Churches, which, put your hand up if you're familiar with the work of Welcome Churches. Okay, Welcome Churches got set up to help churches to be spaces that welcome refugees. So we've got a number of people coming to the UK who are refugees, and the church in many different spaces is doing a great job of welcoming, connecting, helping those people. And you're possibly not aware, you probably aren't aware because not many of you have heard of this, but our church is a signed up member of Welcome Churches. So if someone comes to this country and is looking for a church that's going to be welcoming, they go on that website, they can find details of churches. And we post information about our English classes, which is the obviously the ministry that we run out at New River. We post information about our free English classes on Welcome Churches. So any refugee that's come to the UK is looking and is in London, is looking to improve their English for free, they find out information about our group. So there's 3, we could mention other things, but there's 3 things there that are just helping us to do this really well. And this, if you're interested, this photo was from Janice's trip to find out more about the Great Fire of London. She took all the English class on a trip. They're actually at the top of the monument, so they've climbed up all the steps up the monument. But it's a shame it doesn't come through very well. It's just smiles on people's faces. There's a sense of connection. There's a sense that they're enjoying what they're doing together. Everyone, including the people helping from the church, just together, doing that together. Okay, let's come back to the story of Ruth. I'm aware we haven't got long, and I knew that would be the case because we wanted to read through the whole story. But I introduced what we were doing this morning as the topic of welcome and change. And we've said quite a lot about welcome. The other aspect of people going to a different culture, travelling, coming to London, moving house, all those kind of things, is change. And you may not feel like you're new to London, and you may not feel like you need a big welcome at this point in time, although I think all of us need a sense of welcome. But you may relate to the idea that you're about to go through change, or there's change on your doorstep, and how you deal with that change, dealing with it well, is a question for you. How do I deal with this well? And how do I deal with this well as a person of faith, as a Christian? And both of these ideas, welcome and change, just come through the story of Ruth and Boaz in the book of Ruth. And I thought it would just be worth us just picking up just 4 different things that we find happening in the story of Ruth. I'm sure you could find plenty of other things. And I'm afraid I'm not going to have time to share like loads of cultural information. There's sandals being exchanged. There's guardian redeemers. I've never had a guardian redeemer who's in a physical sense, though we'll come on to how Jesus fulfills that role a bit later on. There's all sorts of cultural things that just feel like so distant from our culture, which maybe is quite helpful because we're thinking about cross cultures. But if you've got your Bibles, let's just look at a few points that I think are both helpful for us as we navigate through change, but are also helpful for us if we really want to be a church that offers welcome to, including to the nations, and really wants to seize the opportunity that we have in London to do that well. The implications of what we do, it can be hard work sometimes. Sometimes it's not as easy to relate with someone who's from a different culture as it is someone who's from our own culture. But the rewards are immense. We know it catches God's heart. But also we as a small church here in London can see evidence of how what we do literally has an impact on the nations. And I don't know about you, I find that really exciting. So, I don't know if you feel like you could summarize the story of Ruth. You possibly picked up in a reading, you've got this woman Naomi who's going back to her people, going back to the place where presumably she grew up. So I guess it's like the Restrepo's for you, not for Sophia because you've grown up over here, but for you guys going back to Colombia, or for Judith going back to Angola, for Hai, you going back to China, or for so many different people in the room, just thinking about going back to where you grew up. For me, that'd be East Anglia. Completely different country as far as I'm concerned. But Ruth, it's different for Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite. She's Naomi's daughter-in-law. Her husband's died. She's got no legal obligation or connection with Naomi. But she clearly loves her. And you don't have to know a lot about the cultural background to know that this isn't just about someone being on their own. It's thinking about someone's well-being, someone's financial resources. What's Naomi going to do? How's she going to survive? And that's why we find Ruth, when they go back to Israel, when we find Ruth, she's gleaning, isn't she? That's the word for picking up the spare bits of corn that get dropped as they bring in the harvest. She's a woman who's dependent on others for her existence. She's there, and I think one of the first things we see in her story actually is that her faithfulness to go, which really speaks to me. If I go on the next slide, her faithfulness to go. Look at Ruth 1 verse 16. It's that beautiful commitment that she makes to Naomi. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. I think there's a faithfulness here in Ruth's willingness to go, that is both a faithfulness to God, actually extraordinarily to Naomi, her mother-in-law's God, but also faithfulness to others, to Naomi. And I think anyone who talks about managing change well, having a sense of community around you is really valuable for managing change, managing life generally. And I listened to a podcast recently that was saying in America, they reckon that the average person they've done, I don't know how they've measured this, but the average person in America now reckons that they have between 0 and 1 confident people they can share with on a deep level about what they've got no one to share with. I mean, that's tragic. I'd have to look into the statistics of it, but so Ruth commits herself both to Naomi's God and to Naomi, and they move together in community. The other verses I've got on there. Verse 17, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. I've then put 2 verse 7 on the screen. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. She commits herself to working hard in order to be there for Naomi. It's not just words, she's bearing out her commitment in her actions. Verses 11 and 12. This is from Boaz's perspective of what she's done. I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. Her faithfulness gets observed, recognized, and applauded by Boaz. And there's so many things in this story that are relationships done well, done faithfully. And it's like the meeting of like minds between Ruth and Boaz, who both want to do the right thing. It's beautiful context for good things to happen. What do we find? Well, in the context of what we've been looking at today, of course, we find a warm welcome. We find both Ruth and Naomi, but particularly Ruth as an outsider, as someone's come as a Moabite. Find Boaz, and Boaz extends that welcome to her. My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and take a drink from the water jars the men have filled. And Boaz tells his men specifically not to be generous with how much of the corn that they leave out for her to gather. So Boaz offers a welcome to Ruth and to Naomi that is one that is going to help to provide for their need. Verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. So when it comes to the mealtime, he involves her, invites her over, makes sure that they have something to eat. And then verse 16, that's when he talks to his workers, pull out some of the stalks from her, for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to pick up. And as a consequence, this becomes a story of blessings shared. Shared blessings. It says in verse 17 of chapter 2, so Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah, which is about 22 litres, I believe. So it's quite good going in a day's work in the field. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. And then verse 20, the Lord bless him. So that was stories about Ruth being blessed and Naomi being blessed because of this abundance, what they gather. They then want to share the blessing with Boaz. Did you see that? One blessing generates another blessing. Verse 20, the Lord bless him, Naomi said to his daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. And then 3 verse 10 is Boaz again extending blessings. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. Ruth is basically saying, although you're an older man, I'd be happy to marry you, to be considered for marriage. So it's like Boaz is blessed, and then the blessing comes back to him. The Lord bless you, and then he gives it back to Ruth. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. Your kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. In other words, the kindness that you showed to Naomi. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid, for I will do for you all you ask. So it's like he's going to bless her again. All the people of my town know that you're a woman of noble character. And I think that's the opportunity that we have as a church that welcomes. We offer a blessing, but we actually find that the blessing comes back to us in so many different ways. And then I'm just going to finish by just picking up on how this idea of the guardian redeemer just points, doesn't it, towards Jesus. Jesus the Redeemer. The lineage at the end of chapter 4, do you remember it says that Ruth gets pregnant and she gives birth, and it just gives you a short little bit of who that son, who they then give birth to. It gets picked up on in Matthew chapter 1. If you go to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5, you'll find that in the lineage of Jesus, there's specific mention not only of Boaz, but also of Ruth. I think that's so lovely. Not only does Ruth as a woman get in on the lineage, but also Ruth as the foreigner gets in on the lineage of Jesus. And it all points towards Jesus. Ruth 3 verses 12 and 13 is where it talks more about this idea of a guardian redeemer. Someone to perpetuate the family line. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there's also another person closer. So Boaz is related, albeit remotely. He can step into that role of being a guardian redeemer. That word redeemer will go on to be used about Jesus and gets used. Redemption is a word that gets used about what Jesus does. And it's the idea of Jesus, in this case it's Boaz stepping in to unlock the potential of someone who's been trapped, who's got no opportunity, who's imprisoned by their circumstances, to set them free and to give them new opportunity for life. And in this case, for that life to be remembered down and celebrated down the generations. That's exactly what Jesus does today. So I think as we step out, even if it's sometimes hard work, even if sometimes we might feel misunderstood, and we seek to welcome, particularly those who are hear from other cultures, other countries, maybe got English as a second language, we can remember that we're doing this as a ministry that is a redeeming ministry that captures and carries something of the flavour of Jesus. So I'm going to invite the worship group to come up. And if you're interested in the story of Ruth and want to look at it more, there's lots of resources on the internet where you can kind of dig down deeper into that. But I wanted to leave enough time and space today for us just to sing a couple of songs. And in singing, coming to Jesus, to just know that sense of welcome that he gives us, but also the sense that he is going to help us to deal well with the changes that we face. We had a couple of words during the prayer meeting this morning. That God wants us to catch his heart, and in particular the sense of ease that he has over us and with us. Someone else had an image of God actually as a mother figure, putting his hand under us, his wings over us, nurturing and caring for us. There's also an image that might relate to some people who maybe don't feel like super comfortable about being really sociable. The idea of showing hospitality may be something you find challenging. That God wants to help you in that. So as we just sing these two songs, you can reach out to God, just make yourself feel comfortable as we do this. But if you would like someone to pray with you, there'll be a couple of people, including myself, just out in the cafe area, and we'll be willing to pray with you as we sing these two songs. You can stand up, you can stay seated, whatever makes you feel comfortable at this point. But let's reach out to Jesus. Receive his welcome. Receive his commission to welcome others.